ever be planning on trying to cut through that thing, I would always plan on cutting around it, always. So just knowing that the chine bone's here knows that now I'm gonna look for some kind of insider access point to make sure that I could cut around that. There's just no way I could cut through it. Why would I want to? So first thing I want you to kind of get into really is actually this little piece of tenderloin. Because this little piece of tenderloin, once you open it up and remove it, and you don't have to remove it. Like if you say my goal is to make sure that I kind of open this thing up in one piece, I'm cool with that. If that's like a goal, like it makes sense. Again, more often than not, my suggestion would always be, before I cut it off, like, do I have a use for it? Like, would I have more weight and value, right? If I'm a butcher or a salesman, it's gonna go off weight, so every time I move a piece off, I lose weight. So does it have value if I cut it off? Lots of chefs, lots of people, I know for a fact, would say, I'm gonna cut this off because I'm probably gonna eat it in like 10 minutes. And if that's the case, that makes sense to me. But if you can leave it on, I would leave it on. What I'm mostly looking for is to try to start to figure out how I can work my way around these bones. So I move it more or less out of my way and cut it off. But then I've got a big chunk of fat in here that's kind of preventing me from really seeing anything in here. So your first move is going to be, if you have a tenderloin in there, to kind of pull it out of the way. But your second move is to get this big piece of chunky fat out of there. Okay? Make sense?
Sure.
Once you do that, you're going to give yourself the opportunity, right, to try to open up this little, remember I like to call it the window, and give you the opportunity to kind of open up the window. See how, like, right away that kind of just opened up by me just touching it a little bit? And I'm going to try to do that on both sides. I'm going to try to follow this little niche. There's my knife. What you're going to find in here, what I'm trying to go for without cutting through, just remember, normally I would not stop. Right? Normally I would not stop. But here I'm going to because we're in class. Put her back together. Right? Ball, right? That's how we're starting. The ball's got to have a socket that fits on it. So if you're actually looking at it and you know where the top of the bone is, you'll end up knowing what side to go, because now that becomes the other confusing part. Everybody should be kind of here, and then everybody kind of expose that ball and joint socket. But what you need to do now is kind of bring your knife into it, but you got to know which side to bring your knife to, right? You're going to try to separate this ball and socket by using force, right, to kind of roll this piece out. So if I was going to do it on there, which I'm not, I'd be holding it because I'm trying to roll this piece. So I bring my knife into their ball and socket joint. I would open it up and I would just use my hand, right? What I did here is I opened it up, I just kind of put my hand in there and I used my hand to just roll that thing out. And I just rolled it out. Once you roll it out, now you got to go back, right? And refine where that bone needs to. Because if you cut straight down, what ends up happening again is you start to lose some product. So we go back, because the truth is once you can separate it from the ball and socket joint, it becomes quite easy now to fabricate or take away. And all I want to do is end up kind of rolling this piece out. And every now and then I'll kind of go back and I'll retrace my steps with my knife. See how kind of easy, like I'm just using that friction, just following it with my knife. Trying not to leave a whole lot of product on there. And again, I just continue to like search out with my knife till I can kind of remove it. And out it comes. And hopefully the majority of your product kind of stayed on. When you look back at this thing, you can understand a little bit of where it comes from and why it comes from, how we get it, Remember they call it the H bone? Most people think it's an H bone because it's like close to the hip. But remember, this is an H bone that's spelled with an A. It's not really close to the hip. They just kind of call it the H bone because it kind of looks like an H bone, like an H, truthfully. That's it. That's kind of why they call it that H bone. After you clean it out, take all that material off of there. What do you think that noise is, by the way? Like, we don't have a grinder. Nobody's got like a metal. Ah, good call. It's my hearing aid.
Really
good call. Yeah. Anyway, once you kind of scoop that little thing out, there's kind of like a little H, and that's truly why. That's why it's not an H with an H. It's an H with an A. And that's going to be the first bone you're going to take out. And I'd like for everybody to try to get to that step if possible. I'd like to think. The one thing that I might ask you to do at this point would be like kind of to turn it a little bit. Right? There are times, especially if you're getting good at something or you're trying to develop some muscle memory, meaning you're going to end up repeating this thing over and over. And I'll use the chicken as an example. I think this way. Because what you're trying to expose is, anybody know this big old bone we're trying to expose?
Femur.
Ultimately, you're trying to follow the bone, right? Because if you think, okay, this femur runs straight, you're going to be wrong because remember, left side, right side, right? And there's going to be a natural bend in every animal. So if you just kind of go, bam, I'm going to be really cool and I'm just going to do this in one shot, and you go like that, it's very possible you just missed it. Actually, totally, right? So it would be a strange thing to do. Again, using your knife as like a searching tool is a little bit smarter, right? Because all I want to do is I want to keep all my pieces intact as much as I can. And my bone doesn't really run straight down like that. It kind of runs on a curve. But what I don't want to do is just slice this whole thing open because then I can never reclose it. Because ultimately, again, my goal would be to reclose this guy and make it look as if it's never really been touched. So what do I do with my chicken when I'm messing with it, right? Everybody remember the chicken femur that we were trying to get out? I kind of expose it, and I like to try to get my fingers under it. Because once I do, then I can kind of lift it a little bit.
Cooking with the bone, speculation that, it does add a lot of flavor. It adds more flavor to the meat. So that's what that you would want to do. Remove the bone, search it out.
To do that. Then what I've asked you to do is, or for me personally, I like to make sure that I can get my hand underneath it. So I know that I've got connective tissue on both sides. I just want to make sure that my muscle group is connected on both sides. Then what I'm going to end up doing is I know that this is a big old knuckle, right? And I've seen cartoons before, so I've got to imagine, right? I've got to imagine that this thing looks like a cartoon bone. So I should find another big piece attached to it. So I'm going to search it out with the tip of my knife. I'm just going to slowly try to leave as much usable meat on as I can, but also lift this guy into the air. How do I do that? By just cutting around it, and then I'm going to hold it, okay? Now we kind of let gravity do its work. We just kind of start to cut around it, and as I hold it, basically it's going to peel itself off. Why? Because it weighs a lot, to be totally honest with you. It's a big piece of protein. So this is the technique that they use when they really do have big pieces of protein that they're trying to kind of remove. Now, I have to stop here. I have to stop. Because now I make the decision on what am I actually removing, right? Am I leaving this shank bone? Yes. What is this thing going to look like when I retie it, right? If I remove the shank bone, aesthetically, this becomes a little bit soft. It just becomes a little bit strange, aesthetically, right? You can almost see the natural seaming on it, right? So as a chef, you have to make the decision. If I leave it, which most people do, because for it to look like a roasted leg, it's important. If you leave it, more often than not, we will French it. So it now looks like it's supposed to look. If you leave it, you should French it. No point in leaving it unless you make it look like a leg, right? if you're going to take it out, right? If you're going to take it out, you would end up removing this in one shot. Because you're not going to leave it if you're going to take it out. If you're taking out this leg, right, it just, the whole thing goes bye-bye and this thing just gets broken off, right? But since we're kind of like in fabrication class and it's not like an application, right, what we're going to end up doing is we're going to make it look like a leg, meaning we're going to leave it and we're going to French this area, okay? Why is that important? Why did I just waste 20 minutes talking about it? Because this is now your new fabrication point, right? You will not cut further than here because you're leaving this. If I was taking it out, I could just go shh, and off it goes. But I'm not. Right now, I don't want to go much further. What am I looking for, right? How do I separate this out? Do I get the saw?
No, you could explore with your knife and cut it out just like you did with the socket.
So what am I looking for?
I would
And
call that
some
a
gravity
pleural
action will
cavity.
help me here.
Pleural cavity.
I'm gonna to stop because there are some big kind of pieces and glands and fat in here that I want you to search out. Gentlemen, were you able to find some of it once we moved a little bit? Okay. So what you're looking for are big pieces of like fat that are gonna kind of almost be in clumps, right, inside these big muscle groups. If we were to really get like into science behind it, there's like 9 different muscle groups that are actually attached to here. We wouldn't want to separate those out. But when you think about that, you should just assume that there's a lot of connective tissue in there, right? So what I've asked people to do is kind of search out, as you're looking for it, one, you should see a kneecap. Should have, if you kind of fabricate it right, there should still be like a little kneecap left. On one side or the other end, kneecap, it should be quite open, where the other side might be a little bit tucked in. And what I've asked people to do is to start to look at that side that's tucked in and realize that there's a natural reticulum in there, natural separation, that I want you to search out. And what I was showing to the guys earlier is that sometimes you don't see it, right? Because as you start to go through your natural separation, you just get stuck on like what would be a little band, and we can almost define it as like a little rubber band or a little strand or something that would prevent you from like keep separating it naturally. Right? And people kind of stop at that point. And what I've asked these guys to do is specifically was, as you start to see those kind of bands, and we can use this one as one, right? You would actually just kind of cut it. Because if you cut it, right, it was just preventing me from actually refining my natural separation. But you're gonna see those, like we got to one right here and it was like, well, I can't go any further. The majority of it was separated. It was just connected by a little tendon, really. So I popped that tendon, and all of a sudden I started again. The reason why that becomes important to me, well, my goal is to try to leave this thing whole. I also don't really want to cut into any major muscle group, but I'm searching for this. Look at this thing. There's another little band that was holding that together. Good definition. Without taking too much red, right? I want to try to not take red because what's my red is my actual muscle, my consumable product, right? And I want to grab that big old chunk of fat out of there, right? Because more often than not, sometimes you might find a gland in there. Bam! Gross. So you didn't see it, but remember we discussed glands previously? Mm-hmm. Right? It wasn't visible. I had to kind of search it. But what that does is to create more of an off-putting flavor profile to your product. So if you can remove it, do it. Well, if you don't know it's there, you wouldn't think to look to remove it. So that's why we kind of go through this specific exercise. Now what you're going to find on the other side, there should be something a little similar to that band, and it should be kind of back here a little bit. And you could almost kind of see it down here on the bottom. So now you're looking to, that's not good. There's some good ones and some bad ones. Read that inflection, boys, that didn't sound good. That one's gonna come out, okay? For my French. I'm gonna kind of circle cut it all the way around. Now for me, I'm kind of specific again, where I think that any connective tissue is going to kind of mess up my fabrication technique. I want to make sure that I try to discard any material, even if it's a small, tiny little band that possibly would be anything. I'm going to kind of get in here, get that. I'm going to use kind of the idea that I should be able to kind of just scrape this whole thing off.